Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Help Is Here podcast, brought to you by the Beyond the Compulsion Academy. My name's Tom Molyneux. I will be your host, and here we have Mary Paulus alongside me as well. Welcome back, Mary. How are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
Yeah, all right, thanks. All right. As you may have read from my newsletter, I was doing the homeless sleep out last night, so just sleeping on some cobbled
Yeah.
floors in a sleeping bag out in the cold, rainy weather in Sheffield, in England, and it wasn't actually too bad, if I'm truly honest with you. I don't think that experience could ever replicate what it must be actually like to be homeless, right? But still a little bit tired today. So
Yeah. And sleep
you know,
out there every night, right? And never have the shelter. And yeah,
I think
wow.
just
Good for you
worrying
though,
and
doing that work.
yeah, I mean we raised quite a lot of money for charity. I think we're like £65 away from our £2,000 target now, and all that money goes to this homeless charity that really good. I've volunteered with them a few times before, so I know that their work's actually good. You know, with some charities, they're not the best, but this one is, yeah, really, really effective. It's just a small local one. And yeah, I just think being homeless though, there's so many challenges that I think day to day you wouldn't even imagine, like you wouldn't even consider. And it did make me think, with kind of addiction and always kind of wanting more, and just in our society that we live in, even if it's like wanting to progress in your career or other just like first world problems as they call them. It's like there's so many things where actually when you take away someone's home, you take away like that shelter, you realize that wow, you just are so privileged, and so I'm sure I'm going to sleep really
Yeah.
well tonight in my
Everything at
bed.
our fingertips. Well, there was a documentary made a long time ago. It's called The City is Dying. It was about the homeless situation in Seattle, and now Portland is equally as bad. But basically, in the documentary they trace it all back to addiction.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
if without solving the addiction problem, I mean, we can deal with some of the symptoms of the homeless, well, addiction problem than homeless problem, and
mm,
give them housing and whatever, and do the best to help them in whatever ways we can. But unless we get to the core where it's an addiction problem, and hopefully that's what we're helping do.
yeah, absolutely.
Help us
Well, last
here, right?
night what we were
Yeah.
doing is so we had like three of my colleagues at the company I'm currently at. Now, as you know, I'm leaving that company in only like 2 weeks, but the team there were brilliant. I've worked with these guys for like 3.5 years, and there's a woman called Liz who was talking about someone she knew, and she was saying how they were addicted to heroin and they just weren't getting any support from anywhere. But it can be really complicated because they've got the addictive neural pathways, but then they're also homeless, and then they've also got all these other problems going on. Maybe they've got some kind of, I don't know, some other mental problem that's
Yeah.
now sort of occurred due to like the combination of addiction and being homeless, and then you add trauma on top of it, and then you've just got all these different problems, but there's no one that deals with all of them because although they may go to some specialist therapist or get housed temporarily, it's like those addictive neural pathways then haven't changed. They may come to us, we may be able to deal with the addictive neural pathways, but let's be honest, we're not going to be able to house
Yeah.
anyone or deal with some of the other problems. They may want to see a therapist for that, but yeah, it can get really quite messy if it starts off with the addiction, but then it completely ruins their life and they do get to the point where they're homeless. Then it's a whole
But
nother kettle of
what
fish.
comes first, the chicken or the egg, I mean, the way I see it, addictions become epidemic. And so then now what has followed that is mental illness, right? Epidemic. And then homeless, and that's kind of spiraled out of control, where it really seems to me like, the I believe that the a lot of the mental illness and the mental illness diagnoses are coming out of people that have addictions and are not they're not being treated in a way that people can really feel empowered and okay and get beyond them so that they can actually get on with their lives. And they're just, I mean, what would be more negatively, what would more negatively affect your mental wellness than having an addiction? It's destroying your life, And everything you try to do to stop it, you're motivated to stop it, but everything you try to do just makes it worse.
Mm.
That's gonna affect anybody's mental wellness, and then so now we can, diagnose them. And then generally speaking, when people get diagnosed with mental illness, they have some kind of drugs that they give them, medications or whatever, and like say the heroin addicts, they're giving them methadone or whatever, or Suboxone, and it's just equally as addictive as if they're so ill, mentally ill, that they can't go without it. They're unable to get through to, getting beyond the addiction without taking more addictive drugs. So it's a spiral, for sure. It's a spiral. So
Yeah, just going back to, I suppose, porn addiction here. We had a client this week that I'm just thinking of now because you mentioned, you can be trying to quit this thing and be really, really motivated. And that was like me for so many years as well. And we had a client this week who we spoke to for the first time on his Liberation Day call. And he was like one of the most successful people I've spoken to within the program, really high flying job, doing really, really well, great family and everything else. And he was saying how he'd also tried the 12 steps method, which is very, very common amongst people trying to overcome any addiction, right? And the people that come
right.
to us, a lot of them have tried 12 steps. And what he really didn't like is that identity behind it of you are now labeled an addict. And I think for someone who has a lot of success in their life, to then also be called an addict, it can almost feel like there's these two parts of you, and there's this like hidden part that's behind closed doors that no one really knows very well that you hide from the rest of the world. And then you have this part of you that is doing really well and outwardly maybe confident and funny and sociable and very successful. And I think that conflict as well and that lack of integrity is a part in addiction which isn't talked about quite enough. And I think particularly with the shame side of things and the porn addiction, I think that's what I lived in, for like 9, 10 years is these two different parts that were sort of separated. And I think
Yeah.
bringing it all together and having that integrity to be like, yeah, this is who I am now, and I have literally nothing to hide from the world is really nice and it's
Yeah.
possible. It's 100% possible.
And that, him, not liking that label of addiction, with 12 step, that's kind of the idea is now you proclaim yourself an addict, right? And then it's kind of like that's a label and it's a lifetime thing. You're going to have to go to meetings for the rest of your life. And then like the mental illness, there's more labels on top of that, when the way that we approach it is this is something that's happening to you right now. And when you can change the neural pathways, and I've said it a million times, it's not a life sentence. Addiction is not a life sentence. You can actually change the neural pathways. And just because you have addicted neural pathways, that's not a moral judgment because you need to recognize it for what it is. You have an addiction, you have addicted neural pathways, but that's not your identity. That doesn't have to be your identity for life, that you're going to be this person who 20 years from now experiences some crisis and you're going to have all these incredible urges and you're going to have to go to a meeting. Otherwise, your sobriety is going to be at risk. That's not the case,
Mm,
So, but recognizing it as addiction and not denying the reality of addiction and not underestimating addiction is important. So, but it doesn't have to be a lifetime label. You have to be branded an addict.
yeah,
So, yeah, yeah.
absolutely. I watched this film. I can't remember what it is right now, and I really want to go and research it. So maybe I will, and maybe we'll talk about it on the next episode a bit. But there was this amazing film. And it was based on a true story where there's these quite old people, I think maybe like 70s, 80s, and they were in this sort of facility, institution, place where disabled people went and they could barely move, they could barely talk at all. And essentially most people had kind of given up on them. And, they were just being fed. They weren't talking. Their family would occasionally visit them and they were just motionless. And I think they'd all taken a certain drug like many, many years ago and it like impacted their brain in a certain way, which had led to this like huge dysfunction in their brain, and so they could barely move, barely talk. And one of these people who worked in this institution came along, and I think he was like a scientist or something, and he started to sort of experiment with some of these patients. And I think he first like threw a ball in the air and one of them caught it. And he was like, what? Like, how have they moved and reacted to it? So part of their brain was still active and able to catch this ball. And then he started to conduct more and more experiments. And as it turned out, it was possible for these patients, their brains to change. And they actually ended up getting up and walking and talking again. I think
Wow.
eventually they did go back to this more like a vegetable state, really, to be truly honest. But for a temporary period, they were able to change their brain and be like up and moving. And it was an
And at
incredible
that
film.
age, yeah,
Yeah, and at that age as well. And it was so interesting that I think if you just kind of categorize and label people a certain way and stick that kind of, yeah, that label on them, and you don't believe in the possibility for them to change, then yeah, they are going to stay the same. Whereas when you actually
yeah,
can train someone in a certain way to change, you can see that, oh yeah, change is possible. And I think just getting that message out there to more and more people is going to be really impactful, hopefully. But yeah, it's absolutely possible, and all the neuroscience proves it as well. You know, I really recommend a book called The Brain That Changes Itself. I think it's by Norman Deutsch. A really good book. I read that, I think, at the start of last year. And yeah, it's a lot about neuroplasticity in there. And there's some interesting stories actually about porn addiction as well. But yeah, I'd recommend that film as well. I can't remember what it's called. I might have a little Google while you do some talking, Mary.
yeah. I was thinking about that. There's a movie called What the Bleep Do We Know with Marlee Matlin.
Yeah.
And they actually showed the neural pathway disconnection and reconnection by just having somebody, talk, or just like think a different way. They actually show like how that they actually disconnect and reconnect. So they say when
Really?
you're older, it's more difficult. They
Yeah.
also say you can take mushrooms, right? There's psilocybin therapy now is like a thing in Oregon. I don't know about there, but it's like there's people being certified for that, but not recommending it. You can change your neural pathways without doing mushrooms, but I've just heard that recently that it really helps with
Yeah.
neuroplasticity. But
Well, talking about older
yeah.
people as well, changing like their brain. So my granddad's really into ukulele at the moment, and he's
Oh,
in his
nice.
80s. And yeah, he started to go to like these ukulele groups and playing very often. And apparently he's just got like really quite good actually at ukulele, and he's
Yeah.
playing all these Beatles songs, and he's in this like
Oh,
group, and they've
nice.
got a big performance together. And
I want to play with
yeah,
them.
it's amazing, yeah. And he was saying that his brain feels a lot smarter because he did move to Tenerife and he was just kind of chilling outside in the sun. He never learned Spanish. He lived there for about 30 years. And then
Wow.
due to Brexit and various other things, he ended up moving back to England about a year ago. And to be fair, I was a bit worried about him thinking, he's going to miss the sun, he's going to miss his friends that he had in Tenerife, but he's just gone straight into like all these like communities and started learning ukulele. And he was saying how sharp his brain feels because of it. And that then passes on to all these other areas of his life as well, which is awesome,
Nice.
more capable at learning other skills then as well. And I guess in a way, maybe that's kind of similar to like overcoming an addiction and why you have all that peace of mind and energy and enthusiasm to go learn and do other things in your life as well, because it's like you've literally changed one part of your brain. So I suppose it gives you more belief that you can change other parts of your brain as well.
Well, they say that like if when kids are young, then kids are young, duh, but they can learn second languages much easier than somebody who's older, but
Yeah.
not to discourage anybody from being able to change addicted neural pathways, but I really think too that our how to is so important to be able to get connected to the correct pathway. You can't just go distract and substitute and try not to think about and do other things and expect to change neural pathways of addiction. That's requires a very specific method. So yeah, but it can be done,
Mm.
and maybe you're gonna you're older, you're going to do a little bit more of the rewiring, but it's totally possible. I mean, your grandpa's a good example,
Mm.
learning ukulele, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
it is ukulele is a little bit easier than guitar, but it's challenging, Yeah,
Would
good
you
for
play
him.
ukulele as well?
Well, I can, but it's so weird to know what your guitar chords are, and then they're completely different on the ukulele. And there's
Right.
only four strings. It's weird, It's
Yeah.
I'm just used to playing the guitar, so I like the ukulele. It's cool. It sounds really cool. We have ukulele classes at the art center where I work too, and it's
Oh,
a
nice.
lot of older folks in there. People love that class. So yeah,
Awesome.
it's awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah,
good stuff. Well, I
yeah,
know we
good.
were going to talk about No Not November in this podcast, but we obviously went off topic talking about homeless people and then older people. That film, by the way, is called Awakenings. I gave it a quick Google while you were talking a few minutes
Oh
ago.
yeah.
Have you
I
seen it?
recognize that name. I'm gonna look it up and try to watch it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's Robert De Niro, really good film. I remember
Oh
crying when
yeah.
I watched it quite a bit. And talking about crying, actually, another sort of story just about what came up this week for one of our clients was he was saying how since like overcoming this problem, he's started to feel a lot more emotional, and he was kind of asking me, do you get that as well? And I was saying, yeah, like you definitely do, because I think you almost automatically go to porn or start thinking about porn when like intense emotions come up when you're in an addiction, because
Yeah.
you don't feel like you can deal with them, I suppose. Like you don't feel quite safe and secure in yourself because you are just, yeah, thinking about
Or
addiction.
you use them as a reason, right?
Yeah,
I'm having
exactly.
this emotion, so this is why I want to do porn. Yeah. Sorry,
You
go
did,
ahead.
yeah. That's exactly it. I wrote about that in my newsletter this morning about how, I was on the train home from having a night out, like on the street, in the cold, rain, tired,
Yeah.
and I'm coming home on the train feeling, well, I was alone, but I was alone and tired, and it was so interesting to me because I just thought back to how in the past, whenever I was alone and tired on the train home, I'd always then have these like intense urges or start thinking about how do I distract myself or stay busy for the rest of the day so I don't look at porn. Whereas
Yeah.
now, there literally was zero worry, like not even one bit of concern. And that's due to doing the work though, of like every time I've had an urge for, a year, it's like, okay, you go through the scripts, you think that through, and then what happens is you change your brain so you don't need to worry about urges in the future because your brain just knows that that's not the path to go down anymore.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, in the past, I definitely would have used like tiredness, loneliness. They would have became the reasons to engage. And so
Yeah.
my brain would create more tiredness, more loneliness, one way or another,
Right.
to get me closer to engaging, which is how it works, I suppose. But
So
yeah,
I'm dying to know what No Nut November is. You told
no.
me I couldn't look it up. So what the heck is No Nut November?
Well, I said to you like 2 or 3 weeks ago, let's do a podcast on No Nut November. And then we got distracted and talked about something else for like half an hour.
Yeah.
And then I feel like the same's happened today. So I
Yeah.
reckon we just leave it for the next episode. We'll cover it.
No. I
I
want to know
promise we'll
what it
cover it.
is.
I'll just,
I mean, we can leave it if you want. I suppose I do have chores to do, but
yeah.
I'm not promising that I'm not going to look it up this time. I'm not
Okay.
Googling No Nut November.
Leave it on a cliffhanger. As long as that podcast goes out by before November, I think we're good.
Yeah,
I want to get it out there before November though, because
yeah.
there'll be at least one person listening to this who goes, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna do No Nut November this year."
Yeah. If it's what I think it is, I mean, I don't know what it's about, but I know it's probably about they're going to stop doing something for a month, right? Like all the other things, that are just creating,
Yeah,
intermittent reinforcement and more problems. So yeah, we can get into it in detail next time for sure, but
cool.
we still got a couple weeks of October left, right?
We do.
Time's
Yeah,
flying.
exactly.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
cool. Well, yeah, we'll cover it in the next podcast. And I tell you what, I've kind of realized from this conversation that you really don't know what the nut part in that is, do you? So,
I don't.
okay, well, that's going to be an awkward one to explain, but yeah, we'll do it in the next episode. All right, thanks so
We'll keep
much
the
for
suspense.
your, yeah.
Suspense. Tune in for No Nut November.
Oh
No.
yeah, big cliffhanger, massive cliffhanger at the end of this podcast. All right,
Yeah.
my battery is about about to die on here as well. I've got like one bar left, so I better
All
charge.
right.
All right,
Cool.
take it easy. See you later.
Chat.
Thanks everyone for
All
watching
right.
or listening. We'll see you in the next episode. Bye bye.